Live from Shore Manor Studios, this is Tales from a Small Town Journalist with Matt Shore.
Hey guys, thanks for checking out this episode of Tales from a Small Town Journalist, the podcast dedicated to all the weird and wonderful stories you are only going to hear about from reporters working in small communities just like yours. I'm Matt Shore, and I was one such full-time small town journalist for almost a decade before I finally hung up my camera and my notepad. And in that time, I gathered some really interesting, unique, and sometimes strange stories dealing with the public. And I got to know a lot of other reporters who also had some unique, strange, and kind of wonderful stories dealing with the public. Before we go any further, I do want to make sure and mention that this is a listener-supported podcast, supported by wonderful folks just like you. There are a couple of great ways that you can show some support. First and foremost, you can visit my website, mattshore.net, and go check out my store and pick up a few of my books. We've got horror, we've got science fiction, we've got comics, we've got a little bit of everything, so please feel free to go check that out. Another great way that you can show some support would be to just spread the word. Use social media, use Facebook, use Twitter, use Instagram. Tell people that they've got to listen to this crazy little podcast. And then following up on that, go do word of mouth, person to person. There's nothing more personal and effective than that, right? Find some person on the street, give them a good shake and say, hey, you have got to listen to this crazy little podcast featuring Matt Shore. This episode, we're going to be talking to Joe Jackson, news director for Bristol Broadcasting. Joe works in radio, so this will be a dive into the radio side of things again. Not something I get to do very often, so that's going to be very cool. And as a matter of fact, Joe, who I crossed paths with a few times throughout my career, Joe was actually there for the wild manhunt that I talked about in my very first episode. So we'll be able to get a different perspective on that really wild chase that ended in a spectacularly bizarre fashion. I simply could not let him talk to me for this show without bringing that one up. I told him right from the front that we're going to have to talk about that story. But that's not the only one. There's some fun stories that he's got, some cool recollections. Joe's first love is probably sports, since that's where he cut his teeth in this industry. But he does quite a bit of news, and that's where he and I cross paths, and that's part of what we're going to talk about here in just a bit. So let's go ahead and get Joe on the phone right now. Okay. I'm speaking with Joe Jackson, news director from Bristol Broadcasting, and if my limited experience with radio is any indication, then that means that you are a jack of all trades. Am I right, Joe?
Well, yeah. I think, first off, Bristol Broadcasting, they own so many radio stations in this area, Paducah and Mayfield, that, technically, I guess I could say I work for 13, maybe 14 different radio stations. But it's just kind of easier to say Bristol Broadcasting. But, I do a little bit of everything: news, sports, sales, website work. It's to the point now, and you probably know this, where the more you can do, the more they will try to squeeze out of you. Have one person do multiple things instead of hiring, multiple people to do a lot of different things. But, I do a little bit of everything, I guess.
They do that in radio, too. Here I thought it was just newspapers.
I think it's getting to be just about every occupation now. They find out you can do stuff, and they're going to make you do it whether you want to or not. But I enjoy that, what I get to do. I guess I'm doing air quotes right now. People can't see that, but I guess I have what's called a fun job in radio. It's stressful at times, but more times than not, it's just, it's a fun gig, and we have a good place to work at and good people to work with.
That's my understanding. The people in radio that I've gotten to know, the common consensus I've seemed to get is you're not going to get rich at it, but everybody just really seems to love it.
Yeah, and it's, obviously, I think the key to life is finding your passion, and, don't always go out just trying to get rich, but find what you like doing and then try to figure out a way to, make a living doing that. And obviously the world of radio has changed a lot over the last 10, 20 years, and we've kind of evolved into different media from that, from website work and digital and all that. But it is a fun job. I always knew after I got out of high school, probably before I even got out of high school, but even in college, that I wanted to do something in radio, TV, newspaper, journalism, something I didn't know exactly how it would all work out, but that was kind of where my passion was, and kind of been lucky to kind of find something that works for me in this area. And like you say, I'm not going to get rich at it, but I have been able to make a living and, raise 3 kids. And so I would love it if it paid a little more, but I think everybody's in that same boat. But it's a fun job more times than not.
You don't have to give me a exact year, but if you just an estimate, how long have you been doing radio?
I started radio in probably the fall of 1997.
Oh, you're getting specific.
Yeah. Yeah, I graduated in the spring of 97 from Murray State and kind of put some feelers out there. I actually thought I was going to go into TV, and then I kind of learned quickly that I may not be pretty enough to be on TV. So I figured out that I could still do a lot of what I wanted to do and what I like doing on the radio. So that's worked out really well for me. But I think I started in radio in the fall of 97. So I've got, 22 years in. So
you know what you're doing.
Yeah, I think so.
I've heard you on the radio for a while now, and you both do both news and sports. And would it be safe to say it seems like your real passion, your love, seems to come out mostly with sports? Not that news isn't important, but would that be accurate that you really enjoy doing sports most of all?
Yeah, matter of fact, that's what I have done. I knew early that I wanted to do sports. And so to do sports, I have to do other things to kind of make a living, so to speak. So to do the play-by-play that I do for Graves County, obviously you couldn't live off that. So I had to have a day job. I have to have a full-time gig. So that's where the news part came in, and started off as just a news reporter and moved up to the news anchor and now news director. But definitely the passion for me is doing sports and the play-by-play at night. But I guess my full-time gig is necessary to allow me to do what I like to do.
I've moved away, of course, from West Kentucky, and so I'm just going by memory. But for me, it always seemed like the voice of the Cardinals the Mayfield Cardinals was Vince Dawson, and the voice of the Graves County Eagles seemed to be you.
That is correct. Yeah, Vince has been doing it for a long, long time, and I actually helped him for about 5 years there when I worked at WYMC. I did some play-by-play for Mayfield and some color commentary with Vince, and then when I got hired by Bristol, obviously they were the ones that broadcast Graves County, and so I switched over and started doing Graves County. And a lot of people that don't understand how that works obviously called me a traitor for going over and broadcasting the enemy, so to speak. But I mean, it was nothing more than the company I worked for didn't broadcast Mayfield. So I enjoyed my time there at YMC and doing Mayfield games, and with all their tradition, especially in football, it was fun. I got to call a state championship game in 2002 when they went undefeated. Just a great group of coaches and players and fans. And obviously now with me doing Graves County, I don't have as many friends in the Mayfield circles, but a lot of them that I got to know are still good friends of mine, and they know that my job is just a job, and I still have a lot of respect for them. But yeah, Vince has been doing it a long time, and he's got his own unique style, and a lot of fans have grown up listening to him, and there's not Mayfield sports without hearing his voice, and so he's done a really good job over time there.
Well, I am certainly in no position to call you a traitor because I am a graduate of Mayfield, and yet I married a Graves County woman,
So you know.
Yeah, I'm in no position to point any fingers. But speaking of Mayfield sports and specifically football, for those who don't know, Mayfield football is, for me, it feels like a miniature version of Friday Night Lights, the TV show, where, I mean, it's like a religion. In Mayfield, you have football and you have Jesus. So,
Hmm.
so
Yeah.
since you have such experience with that and with Vince Dawson, I got to ask: do you have any really kind of standout memories or stories from your time while you were there?
Well, and I'll take you back to, I mean, we had incredible games that we got to call. I mean, with the tradition that Mayfield has, you know, they play a lot of the bigger schools and some of the better schools, and when they go on their playoff runs, you're going up against some big name schools that have a rich history as well. But I think the memory that sticks out to me was that 2002 season when Mayfield was undefeated, and we kind of knew, you know, this is a team that's good enough to take that next step, because it had been a while since they had won an actual state championship. So the community, you know, they were really hungry to get back to Louisville. That's where they had it at that time at Old Cardinal Stadium. And so we knew they were good enough to get there, but there had always been that hurdle of they couldn't get past Danville. And we met them in the state semifinals and beat them at Danville, and then went on to play Beechwood in the state championship game. And I remember a lot about that game, and I actually have a lot of it, maybe all of it, recorded. But the story around that game is hilarious to me, because a couple of things happened. We had been told we were going to be broadcasting from outside the stadium, meaning we were going to be battling the elements. So I hate cold weather. I wore so many layers of clothes that day, thinking that we were going to have, because it was supposed to be, I think, 20-something degrees. So I wore a bunch of layers. And then when we got there, they said, "We've got you inside." And so I had to broadcast that game with like 6 layers of clothes on, and it was just very, very hot. And I still, to this day, don't understand why I didn't go and take some of those layers off. And I guess it was because I was afraid I didn't have anywhere to put them, or I would have to worry about trying to haul them back down to the vehicle. So anyway, I broadcast the game with all these layers on, and they've got the heat on, and it's really, really hot in there. And Mayfield's doing really well, and we're in the second half, and we kind of get this sense that they're going to win. And then I get a phone call during the middle of the game, and it's from my mother-in-law. And I actually see it pop up on my screen, and I actually made mention of it on the broadcast. Why is my mother-in-law calling me? I've got a state championship game to call. So I didn't even answer the phone. And then it wasn't long after that, I started getting some other calls. And long story short, my son, she was babysitting him that day here at home. He had a sledding accident and broke his leg.
Oh, man.
And so when we found that out, you know, we kind of had to wrap up the post game pretty quickly. And I said, we got to get, you know, back to Paducah. He's at the hospital, and he had broken it up in the thigh area, and it was pretty bad break. So we just go flying home as quick as we can, and we got to Beaver Dam, and we had to stop and get gas. And it was me and Vince, and we just had some miscommunication. I thought he paid. He thought I paid. And long story short, we didn't pay for our gas. And so we got about, 10 miles down the parkway after that. And I said, "Did you pay for the gas?" And he's like, "No, I thought you paid for the gas." And I'm like, "Oh, no." I said, "They're going to think we stole that gas, and we're in a company vehicle that has WYMC on it." So I immediately get on the phone and start trying to call them, and could get a hold of them. But once we got back, when Monday rolled around, we called them and told them, "Hey, we were the ones that didn't pay. Sorry about that." And we gave them our card number and was able to pay them so that they didn't think we were criminals. But we were on our way home thinking that the cops are going to pull us over at any time and make us go to jail for not paying for gas. But unfortunately, Mayfield went 15-0, won the state championship over Beechwood, and that was my main focus, getting home to see my son in the hospital, and then outrunning the law, not paying for our gasoline. So that's crazy, isn't it?
It's the stories you don't hear about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm gonna take that one with me for a while.
Yeah, it's funny. And we still, when I talk Mayfield and Graves County, and we were kind of reminiscing about some things, and that was one of the things. Hey, you remember when we did a gas and go after the state championship, and because we both went inside and we used the restroom, and I think we both thought that the other one had paid, and we just got in the car and left. We put like $25-$30 worth of gas in there and took off, and I'm like, that's the last thing we need to do is get arrested for not paying for gas. But it all worked out. But it's a funny story.
It's good. Well, speaking of running from the law, this seems like a great segue to move to a story that you and I were actually both together for, and we've touched on this a little bit before this call. It is the manhunt that we rode with the sheriff on all over Graves County to find this guy that ended in a really bizarre way. I actually talked about it on my very first episode that I did for this, but I cannot resist the opportunity to have the same story told from somebody else's perspective. So I guess we'll start with what are your memories of this particular day that I don't even remember the suspect's name, but what are your memories of going out and riding with the sheriff to find this guy?
Well, and I'm probably going to leave out some details that you probably have remembered. But first off, I remember it was really, really hot that day. It was in the summertime, and there was a man on the loose. I think he had been breaking into homes. He was considered armed and dangerous. I remember they had locked down the schools. It was middle of the day basically that everybody was looking, and there would be reports, hey, he's here, and we were trying to keep up with it as best we could, through the sheriff's office, and I know at one of the little interviews we did, I just asked, and I'm sure you did too, hey, Sheriff, I guess it was John Davis back at that time, I said, can we just ride along with you so we know exactly what's going on, which, how cool is that to live in a place or work in a place where the sheriff says, yeah, just hop in.
Yep.
So I think he had like an SUV type vehicle, so I know me and you were in the back seat and he was in the front seat, and it was really cool from my perspective to feel like we were in an episode of Cops, and hearing all the radio transmission and kind of seeing how they work behind the scenes and trying to find this guy. And we were in the vehicle for a while, and he would get tips and we would go where we thought that he might be, and nothing seemed to be working out. And I remember, for whatever reason, and you may know this better than me, we ended up going to a little grocery store, convenience store in Fancy Farm. And I think we all got some snacks there and something to drink, because again, it was really, really hot. And
it was scorching hot. You're not wrong.
Yeah,
Oh, it was miserable.
I think, and you can correct me, I think while we were in there, somebody even told us that they had seen the suspect, in that area pretty recently. And anyway, so on a hunch, I guess, we take off and we come upon an Amish wagon, and the man, in the buggy is got a trailer, in the back, and there's a guy sitting in the back of that wagon, and he looks hot, he looks tired, he's got cuts on him from where it looks like he's been in the brush. And we met him on the road, and the sheriff was like, wait a minute, that looks like him. And so we turn around, and I'm like, oh my goodness, we're about to have a shootout or something. And I remember that he kind of pulls the vehicle over, he tells the Amish fella to stop his wagon, and then, John Davis gets out and says, are you so-and-so, whoever the suspect's name was, which I can't remember his name either. And he just looked at him and said, yeah. And he says, well, we're looking for you. Yeah. You're under arrest. And the guy didn't do anything. You could kind of tell, hey, I'm tired of running. It's hot. I don't want to do this anymore. And just like that, I mean, after hours and hours of this manhunt that had included several different counties, several different police agencies, here we were just riding around, drinking our soda pop, eating our Snickers bar, and we come upon an Amish wagon who's got the criminal in the back of his wagon. And that was pretty much it. John called in some backup. He cuffed him without any incident, and then he was gone, and I remember, I called in and did a live thing on the radio and said, well, you're not going to believe this, but we have found the suspect. I was actually with the sheriff when they found him. He was in the back of an Amish wagon. Kind of a crazy story, but, everybody was on pins and needles because this guy, allegedly had a gun and was a threat, and it ended really weird if you'd have told me that, hey, we're going to find him in the back of a Amish guy's wagon as we're traveling down the road. But that's what happened. And again, I may have missed some details in there, but that's how I remember it anyway.
Well, if I'm not mistaken, the convenience store that we stopped at, we stopped in Fancy Farm. I believe the Amish gentleman, I know his last name was Yoder. That's as much as I know. But I think he was there. And he
was.
John Davis, of course, John Davis, for those who don't know, John Davis knew everybody in Graves County and probably knows everybody in West Kentucky for all I know. So he and Mr. Yoder are having a conversation like old chums. And then, he got his call and we took off. And we got, I don't know how far back toward Mayfield. And then he got another call that the guy had been spotted. And I think John pulled this massive U-turn right there on the highway, like screeching tires and everything right out of a movie. And we came back the other direction, and there was the Amish gentleman, and he, you can correct me if I'm wrong in this, but I think he was like trying to subtly, and people can't see me do this, like wave at us and kind of point back behind himself with his thumb, like this, he's back here, without outright yelling it.
And you got to think, that criminal probably was pretty smart because, obviously the Amish probably aren't watching TV or listening to the radio. So he probably thought, hey, I can hitch a ride with this guy, and he probably doesn't know that I'm a bad guy that's on the run. But like you said, he probably didn't know that Mr. Yoder had already talked to us.
Yeah, he picked the one Amish gentleman who spoke with us.
Yeah. So, it was that's one of those small town kind of things that was really, really weird, but, that's been, 10 years ago? I still remember it, so I'll probably be telling this story for a long time.
Oh, it's so much, it's such a small town sort of, that could have only happened in my town type of story. One of the other things that I remember is you and I were the only ones there when they caught him, and so I got this great full picture of him that we ended up using in our front page, and then they locked him up and drove him away, and that's when all of the other press got there. So it was you and me pretty much had the exclusive on that.
Yeah, and I think that obviously that was before we had started our website and gone digital, but obviously, we were able to get on the radio and interrupt all of the regular programming and say everybody can breathe easy. He's been caught, and I was actually here when they caught him. I was with the sheriff when we came up on an Amish wagon, and he's in the back of it, and luckily, he wasn't in a position where he, was going to start shooting or running any further. It ended pretty peacefully and calmly and uneventful, but it was just a crazy story. And I remember calling my wife and saying, you're not going to believe this. This has been my day. And I'll tell you this, I've never told John this, but it was so hot that day. I remember standing out on that highway, and I guess it would be 80. I don't really know where we were at. But it was so hot that the pavement I was standing on was kind of in that melting kind of a stage, and it stuck to the bottom of my shoe. I pulled off like, I don't know if it was fresh pavement or what. And when I got back in his vehicle, I'm like, I'm getting this pavement all over the interior of his vehicle. And I'm like, I don't think it's a good time to tell him right now as we're trying to catch this criminal. But that's how hot it was. It just felt like it was melting the asphalt on my rubber shoes that I had on. And then as I was stepping and getting back in the car, I was trying to keep my feet on his floor mats, but that asphalt had gotten everywhere. And I'm like, he's going to have a cow when he sees the mess I've made back here. But obviously that probably was not discovered for a while, and I didn't tell him. As a matter of fact, if he listens to this podcast, he's going to hear about it for the first time.
I missed all that too, and I was back there with you. How did I not notice?
Yeah. Well, you were probably writing your story.
Could be. It could be. And you're right about the heat. We can't overstate that enough. And I remember seeing this guy. He was just the picture of absolute misery. Somebody who has been out in that kind of heat and humidity for days at that point. And
Yeah, you could just tell he was. I've had enough. I'd rather be caught and taken back to jail where I'll get 3 hots in a cot than trying to hide out and run around and beat this heat and be hungry and thirsty. So it was good the way it ended.
Yeah, and John Davis was he was a unique sheriff, I think, and this particular incident illustrates that pretty well because one memory that I have when he first went up to the buggy, he just leans over and he said to him, like you said, are you the gentleman we're looking for? And he's like, yes, I am. And I distinctly remember John saying, do me a favor, stay right there.
Mm-hmm.
You don't...
in your head, you kind of, I guess from watching all these cop dramas, I'm thinking he's going to say, freeze, you're under arrest, don't move. And basically, in his own unique way, he says, are you so-and-so? And he said, yeah. And he goes, we've been looking for you. Do me a favor. Stay right there.
Yeah,
and,
I'll be right back.
I think, when you think back now, if it had been a different person as sheriff at that time, and if he'd have come across the wrong way, maybe it gets a little of a different ending. Maybe the guy starts to get combative. But John had a way to kind of keep it all composed, and I'm sitting there. I never got out of the SUV, but I'm right where John is standing, so I'm like, man, this is about to get real.
Yeah.
But he diffused the situation pretty good, and I assume he had already radioed people to tell him he thought he might have the suspect, because those cop cars kind of showed up pretty soon after we stopped, and so there were police officers and sheriff's deputies and state troopers everywhere within a matter of seconds and minutes. So
oh yeah, you're right. Like that was right out of a movie, squealing down the highway and like stopping right in front of us. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It was a unique story that and you've probably, I've done them before, done ride-alongs, and you spend a couple of hours and nothing happens. They're going to serve summonses, or you might get to be there when they stop somebody for speeding. But to be in the vehicle when they're on a manhunt and actually be there, one of 3 people to catch him, I mean that's something that not a lot of reporters or news people can say.
So are you saying you've been on other ride-alongs that weren't nearly as exciting?
Yeah, I think that by far was my most exciting ride along. And I see the sheriff. My office in Mayfield is in the old Hall Hotel there, and the sheriff is there every morning eating breakfast with a lot of his buddies, and I can hear him over there telling stories. And we've talked a few times since this story happened way back then, and laughed about how unique that was and how crazy that was, and just kind of fate that we decided, hey, can we ride with you? And it all worked out perfectly for us.
Yeah, he had a unique sense of humor, and I think it's one of those that only comes from being on the job for so long. I remember it was just a crash I went out to get some pictures, and the person was badly hurt, but they were driving a Dodge, and I got there and walked up alongside John, and he found this, like how cars have their little logos like on the back hood or whatever, and it was a Dodge, and he picked up the word Dodge. It was just there on the pavement. He handed it to me and said, that's what he should have done.
Yeah. Of course, he's kind of taken over the role, and you may have already done a podcast with him, but he's kind of taken over the role as kind of like the historian of Mayfield Graves County. And so he has so many stories and so many unique ways of telling them, and pictures, tidbits of information, whether it's just about the town, the county, sports, football, past sheriffs. I mean, he's full of stories. He is somebody that, I think after Mr. Barton passed away, he kind of took up the torch there to kind of carry on that tradition. So if you ever get a chance just to sit down and spend some time with him and let him tell you some stories, he loves telling stories.
I'll have to try to do that. I haven't had a chance to get him on, but surely he's available. We'll see. He's retired these days, so
he's got some spare time. I think I see him at a lot of the Graves County games. I know he's a big Mayfield guy, but he's got a grandson that plays on the Graves County basketball team. He's a freshman, so I see him at a lot of things like that. So I think grandkids is what takes up a big chunk of his spare time now. But he's never too busy to talk and tell stories.
He was always a talker, so I'm sure that has not changed. All right, well, cool. Any other exciting experiences that you've had, either in even ride-alongs or in sports?
Well, I mean, I've had a lot of fun experiences. On the sports side, I remember going to call the state tournament with Graves County, and it was one of those situations. We won our first round game, which kind of everybody thought we would, but in the second round we had to play South Laurel, who was the defending state champs, and pretty much had everybody back. Nobody thought we had a chance, and honestly, I probably didn't honestly think we had a chance, and we ended up beating them in overtime, and I got pretty excited in the final call of that game because we hit a shot with about 6 seconds to go to give us the lead, and then they missed it, and everybody's going crazy, and we've just upset the defending state champs, and I'm screaming like a girl on the radio. So that was really, really fun. And just a couple of years ago, when the football team, which obviously Graves County football is always in the shadow of Mayfield with their tradition, but back in 2014 they got on a really, really good run and made it all the way to the state championship game. They lost by a touchdown, but on their way to the state championship they knocked off Bowling Green in the regional finals. It's kind of a similar situation. They were the defending state champs. They had won 50-something games at home in a row. Nobody had been able to even come close to them, and Graves had to play them in the regional championship at Bowling Green and beat them 7-0, shut them out. And it just made, waves across the state that, here little old Graves County had beaten the defending champs and stopped their long winning streak. And we went on to beat John Hardin in the semifinals, and then went to the state championship for the first time in school history. So that was really, really exciting for the football program. So those are some of the things I remember on the sports side more than anything. And I think on the news side of things, obviously, the story we were just talking about kind of has a funny, good ending. But I've done a lot of the things on the news side that are not good, and unfortunately, you remember, I can think back even to the Jessica Curran situation. I remember when her body was found there at Mayfield Middle School. I was one of the first, if not the first, media people down there, even before they could get it all with the tape and everything. And that whole situation was just awful. And that once they found her body, that started that long stories of them trying to figure out who did it, arresting people, and then finding out maybe we arrested the wrong people, and that was a long saga there. So I'll never forget that day either, because that was awful. And then here recently, obviously going through the school shooting at Marshall County and having to cover that up close, those are the stories and the days you don't like to remember, but they also stick out in your memory because they're bad. That just comes with the job, I guess. You're going to have some good things and some bad things, but those are two things that stick out on the news side.
Yeah, I can understand that. All too often, though, the bad it hits you harder, I think, so it lingers a lot more.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And, I tell people this all the time. Most of my days are really good, and I don't have to deal with a lot of the sad, bad news, but obviously it seems like the older I get, the more of the sad, bad news happens, and it just seems like some days that's all you're doing is spreading bad news because of the bad things people have done or have had done to them. But it's just something you kind of live with. I think to a degree, sadly, I've kind of gotten numb to a degree on how it affects me, just because you just kind of get used to it, and it takes a lot to kind of jar you emotionally now, just because a lot of the time you're doing bad news, and so nothing really surprises you anymore.
Yeah, I can relate to that. With car crashes, I'd go out to get pictures of them. I took so many pictures of different cars, like overturned, flipped, turned inside out, that after a while it just didn't hit me the way it used to. People around me, I'll drive by a horrible wreck these days, and people around me will gasp, and I'm just like, oh, well, That'd be a good picture.
Yeah, and you just got to focus on doing your job. And sometimes when you focus on doing your job, you kind of forget that you're dealing with people and families and friends and their feelings and emotions, and it does kind of stink sometimes because you can't pick and choose what you report on. And so I know here lately I've had to do some stories on some people that I've worked with or been associated with, or in one way or the other, they've been in the sports world with me or the news world with me, and those aren't good days. And obviously, that it's hard on them and their families, but you still got to do your job, and those are hard things to do.
Yeah, I guess a comfort that I take is you take the good with the bad, and I like to think, at least I tell myself, that the good still outweighs it. The bad hits me more, and I seem to remember it more. That's just because so many times the good is just rather forgettable. Like even just a boring day where nothing happens, well, that means nobody got hurt, so that should be a good day.
Yeah, and that's a good way of looking at it. And I always in the back of my mind, when I'm doing stories about people breaking the law, you rationalize it by saying I wouldn't have to do these stories if people weren't breaking the law, and on a daily basis as news director, I have to take calls from people who are mad that we've done stories about them. And it's not, they never say, hey, I'm sorry I broke the law. They always say, hey, why are you doing this to me?
Yeah.
And I'm always like, hey, I'm just reporting it. I didn't do anything, If you didn't,
yeah, right.
If you didn't do the crime, I wouldn't have to write a story about it. But that's just part of it too, making people mad along the way. But it's not always like that. And we do good stories, that. There's a lot of good things that happen. You get to tell the public about, and people really appreciate the job you do, getting the word out on stuff. But it's every day's a new day, and a lot of people that do assembly line work or whatever, they know what they're going to do every day and what their day's going to be at every point of the day. I never know. That's the cool thing about my job. When I get up and go to work, even though I do have somewhat of a routine, I never know what my day's going to be like and where it's going to take me. Just like the day I'm 2 years ago, I'm getting ready to anchor a news broadcast on the radio station, and I get a call, hey, shooting at Marshall County High School, bodies are down, and you just take off, and you get there as quick as you can. Never in my wildest dreams did I think that would happen at a school where my kids are at, but here we are. So you hope stuff like that don't happen, but when it does, you obviously gotta get out there and try to figure out a way to cover it the best you can.
Yeah, and that's one thing where I think it makes journalists unique in a sense. Like if you talk about shootings, like if somebody at a factory, if somebody walked into a factory and started shooting, the factory's going to shut down, and it's probably not going to function at least the rest of that day. But I forget the newspaper where it happened, but somebody came in and shut up the news office, and as soon as the shooting was over, everybody's back to work, and they got out. They didn't miss a beat. Got a paper about it out the very next day.
Yeah, and that was incredible. I was trying to think where that was. It seemed like it was in Baltimore.
I think you're right. I wish I could remember for sure, because, boy, they deserve some credit for that.
Yeah, and not only did they have to continue doing their job and put a paper out, but they had to also report on themselves, basically, and what had happened. And people had been killed there right beside of them. That's just incredible. But you got a job to do.
Yeah, and I'm sure you'd have the same with radio. If something actually happened at the station, it's like, well, we still got a broadcast to do. So,
yeah, thinking back, one of the biggest hurdles and one of the most memorable things that we've gone through was probably the ice storm. How incredible that was as a news story, and then the obstacles you had to go through because nobody had power, so we didn't have radio for a while.
Yeah.
And, once you did have power, then not only were we on the radio trying to report things, but we became the go-between. We would have businesses that would call us and say, hey, can you announce we've got kerosene? Hey, can you announce we've got this? So people know if they need water, come here. And that was a very stressful time, but it was a good time, where people struggled a bit, but people helped each other, and we used the radio at that time and even our website to say, hey, If you need somewhere to warm up, here's where you go. If you need water, here's where you go. If you need gas or fuel or, kerosene or some kind of a heating source, go here. If you need a generator. And so, it was day and night trying to get information out. And I don't know if I'll ever go through another event like that where the whole area is just shut down. But that's another one that sticks out. I guess that's been now 11 years ago. So that was an incredible time to try to you got to take care of your own family who's in the dark and in the cold, and then try to do work. You can't even get a shower. I mean, it's crazy.
Yep, but like you said, that's the job. All right, well, this has been really good. I believe my son is trying to get my attention outside, so this might be where I need to cut things off.
Well, I appreciate you having me on. I enjoy your work. I wish you the best of luck, and anytime you need me on again or need something from me, I'll be glad to help, and I will recommend that you get John Davis on at some point in the near future, because you could ask him a question and you wouldn't have to talk again for 45 minutes.
Yeah, I remember John well enough to know you are not lying. That's not an exaggeration. As we wrap things up, I do want to again say thanks very much for joining me. This has been really great. I don't get to talk to people in radio as much because my path, often most of the people I met were in newspapers, so it's always cool to hear from the other side.
Yeah, well, as I tell everybody, we're competitors, with each other, but we're also, in it together. We're friends and colleagues, and it's advantageous for all of us to kind of work together and get along and help each other when we can. So I've made a lot of good friends in the newspaper industry, a lot of them who you've worked with over your time, and so I always think about that, when you start looking back at where you've worked and who you've worked for and who you've made friends with along the way. A lot of them have been in that industry, and so it'd be good to get together with some of them, and just talk about some of the stuff like we've talked about today.
Yeah, that's one thing that has been really rewarding for me with this podcast, is getting to talk to people about the stuff like this that I probably wouldn't have had a chance to do otherwise. But
well, I appreciate the opportunity, and like I said, anytime you need anything, just let me know.
I'll do it. Yeah, but thanks again. I appreciate it. Have a good rest of your day, man.
All right, thank you.
All right, thank you, Joe. Thanks for taking a moment to speak with me and to share a few cool stories. I do want to make sure and mention, folks, that this is February, so it's Black History Month. Make sure that you take a moment to dwell on that. And while you're at it, don't forget that Valentine's Day is right around the corner. So if you're married, in a relationship, or it's complicated, or just whatever, make sure that you do or get something special for that special someone in your life. Speaking of upcoming events, there's going to be an official book launch for my newest book, That Time I Saved the Universe, at the Hudabam Book Traders in downtown Clarksville, Tennessee on February 22nd. If you're in the area, please feel free to stop by and check that out. I'd love to see you. And you can find out more information about that on my social media channels, which we will get into right now. This is, of course, a Shore Manor production, and you can find more information about Shore Manor Studios at our Facebook page, facebook.com/Shore Manor. And as for me, there are ways to get in touch with me on Twitter at @TheMattShore, on Instagram at The Shore. You can also email me at mattshore@hotmail.com. And I have my own website, www.mattshore.net. And last but not least, this show does also have its own Twitter account right now. We're a little late to the game with that, but we've got it up and running now. It's at Journalist Tales. You can find all kinds of information about this episode and others, not to mention our website, smalltownjournalisttales.blogspot.com. So as we wind down, I want to thank you guys again for checking out this episode, for taking a moment to listen to some cool stories from a pair of journalists in the field. So in closing, I'll just say again, keep reading and keep listening. Thanks.